One of the topics that has become very important in the past decade, I guess, is p-hacking. So we all know what p-hacking is, but just for the sake of it, let me kind of, uh, give you a definition. So I would say that p-hacking is the creative use of data analysis techniques and data exclusions to bring a p-value of a test statistic below the magical threshold of 0.05. And so why do we care about p-hacking? Well, we care about p-hacking because it threatens replicability. Whenever we engage in p-hacking, or whenever somebody engages in p-hacking, it increases the type 1 error. In other words, it increases the probability of finding evidence for an effect that doesn't really exist. And so, in fact, sometimes we find evidence for effects that do exist. So the probability of a type 1 error hasn't really gone up, right? There is, that issue is moot. But when we engage in p-hacking, what will happen then is that the estimate of the effect size is going to be overestimated. So we think we're looking at a moderately sized effect, while in reality, maybe it's a small effect. And that's important because if people then do power analysis, they want to build on our research and they do power analysis to figure out what the sample size needed is to replicate the effect and maybe extend the effect, that means that they're going to vastly underestimate the required sample. So together, this means that if somebody engages in p-hacking, if somebody else builds on that research, they're going to get frustrated because it doesn't replicate, or it doesn't replicate as easily as they thought it would. And I think that's all important. So it's all important to recognize the problems inherent in p-hacking. But I do have 2 points to make. First of all, there's nothing wrong with exploratory analysis. So too often, people who engage in exploratory analysis are accused of p-hacking, and that's not necessarily a problem, in the sense that, for instance, if somebody pre-registers an analysis and then deviates from the pre-registered analysis, that is perfectly fine as long as the authors recognize that, as long as the authors acknowledge that. So it's not because you pre-register a particular analysis that you cannot do something else. Of course, what you do have to recognize, if you do that, then the probability of making a type 1 error has gone up. So ideally, if you engage in exploratory analysis, what you should do then is replicate that result because it is potentially suspicious or suspect. But engaging in exploratory analysis is not wrong. What is wrong is engaging a lot of different analyses that are all exploratory and then choose one and say, this is the one that I intended to do all along, kind of portraying it as confirmatory. That is a problem. The second point I want to make here is that in trying to address this replicability problem, many people have started using bigger samples. So before, we were happy to have 20 observations in a cell. Now we want 50 or more. It's not uncommon to see sample sizes of 100 per cell. I've even seen research where it exceeded 500 observations per cell. That's great, in the sense that bigger sample sizes will actually create bigger estimates of an effect size, or sorry, more precise estimates of an effect size. That's great. There's no problem with that. The only issue I take with using bigger samples, however, is that a lot of people now have been using bigger samples to start studying effects that have become increasingly small. And that does not solve the replicability problem. If we start using big samples to study very, very small effects, these very, very small effects are very difficult to replicate, even with big samples. So if we have very big sample sizes, because we want to get precise estimates of an effect size, that's perfectly fine. But maybe we should consider not testing at an alpha level of 0.05 anymore, but instead going to an alpha level of 0.01 or lower, right? What we want to do is not use big samples to study small effects, but use big samples to study still moderate effects. Now, of course, in some cases, small effects, tiny effects may actually be managerially relevant, and it actually may be something that you're interested in studying. That is perfectly fine. That's what you want to do, go ahead. But realize that that requires very big samples in order to replicate time and again the results you want to show.